I'm very excited to see this. Every time it happens at the highest level, as a Sicilian Najdorf player myself. You can always count on the French number 1 to play it. After the game in the press conference, Fabiano Caruana said, "It feels very surreal to be back here 1 year later." MVL said, "I'm happy to be back, hoping for interesting fights." The FIDE Candidates tournament was paused last year back in March due to COVID. It resumes this year, 2021, April. Rounds 1 to 7 took place last year. Now we're going to finish off this tournament, round 8 to 14 coming up. In the most exciting game of the day, we have Fabiano Caruana, world number 2, against MVL, world top 10, French number 1. How does Fabiano Caruana beat the Sicilian? Well, we're going to find out. E4, C5, knight F3, D6, D4. We have the open Sicilian. Pawn captures, take. Knight F6, knight C3, and A6. We have the Sicilian Najdorf. I'm very excited to see this. Every time it happens at the highest level, as a Sicilian Najdorf player myself. You can always count on the French number 1 to play it. I mean, he plays it all the time. But is this a strength or a weakness for him? Well, if you always play the same thing, that could be a target. Now, from a spectator's view, it's just great because it leads to some very, very exciting games. Bishop G5. The most aggressive way to play. With this move, White is planning F4, Queen out, Queen to F3 and then castle. E6 played. One option is to play Knight D7, which is an option I like to play with Black. You make sure the knights defend each other straight away. You get the Queen out, you get the Bishop out this way, and you also get the Bishop out this way. 1, 2. Let's say F4, Queen here, Queen F3, and then let's say G6, and the game goes on. But in this game, Bishop G5, E6 played, F4, and Queen B6. This is the poison pawn variation. When you put your queen on this spot, you are going pawn grabbing. Should you take the B2 pawn or not? Well, if you take it, that means you are going to be using a lot of time to capture a pawn. But you are a pawn up. Is it worth it? Is it worth the time to grab that pawn? Well, we're going to see. F4, Queen B6. We go Queen D2. Queen takes B2, you attack the rook, rook B1 and Queen A3. In this position, White has a lot of options. If we consider this position, White has the file. He is a pawn up, but that rook is now very useful. White can strike in the center. White can go bishop out and he can castle. White is very far ahead in development because he's got lots of his pieces out. Whereas Black, he only has the queen and knight. White has bishop, knight, knight, rook, and he's gonna castle soon. White now strikes in the center. Black plays h6, attack the bishop drops back. Take, attacking the knight, but knight to d7. Black attacks the center pawn. If Black can just get his bishop out and then he's ready to castle, he might be safe at the moment. Knight e4 played. Couple of knights right in the middle. They just look so dangerous in general. Knights are just hopping in. Bishop might come in here as well. Bishop h5. You can castle. It just looks too dangerous. Queen takes a2 was played in the game. Just want to show you this trap. You cannot go pawn grabbing because if you can make queen d8 checkmate work, then you are winning, and you can. You just get the knight out of the way, knight b5. With this brilliant move, you threaten checkmate with two options. The knight goes to c7, but also queen d8, and there's no good way to stop it. There's no good way to stop both checkmates. Knight e4 played by Fabiano. Queen takes a2. Black grabs another pawn, but when he grabs this pawn, he attacks the rook for a second time. The rook moves. Queen in the center. With a queen on this spot, you're attacking this pawn along with the knight. Queen e3. White gets out of the way, making sure his queen defends both his knights. This rook is on the d file, combined with diagonal pressure from the bishop. So queen out of the way. Queen e5. Notice Black is 3 pawns up, but White has all of his pieces in the game. Is it even worth going pawn grabbing if none of your pieces are in the game? It's not worth it, man. Your pieces are still at home. What is the point in being 3 pawns up if you can't use it? MVL believes in his ability. Black believes he can defend this. We're going to see what happens. c3, White defends the knight in the center. Bishop c5 played. Possible because you cannot take the bishop because you hang your queen. So bishop c5, you're pinning this way. Bishop g3, you attack the queen. Queen moves out the way. And bishop c4. It looks like a total blunder. You are just chucking the bishop away. But Fabiano Caruana is known for his high-level preparation. He is no way just going to chuck a bishop on move 18, in perhaps the most important tournament of his life. Bishop c4 played. What is the idea? Queen takes bishop. Bishop d6. This is the idea. You cannot take, because knight d6 check, you're just going to win the queen. If you defend it, it's the same thing. You just take it. And the point is, the knight is going to go to d6 anyway. Still winning the queen. So what on earth can black play? Well, knight c6 is the same thing. Take, take. And then you're still giving yourself the chance to hop into d6. So what on earth could black play? Black decided to play knight f6, giving back the piece. Challenging white's powerful knight in the center. White now takes it. Bishop is on d6. He is stopping black castling. Knight d5, you attack the queen. Queen into the center. Queen e5 played, rook g8, and white now crashes through with knight takes e6. Take, and now take. Very dangerous. If you take, then it's checkmate. You attack the king and the rook. The king moves, and you can take the rook. You might even go rook d5, because this is just too powerful. And then you move the bishop out the way somewhere. The queen is attacking rook, game over. That's why, after knight takes, take, and take, black has to find a way to get queens off, and he does that with queen c3 check. Queens now come off, take, take. Knight attacks the rook, so you might move it. No. You throw knight c7 check. You attack black's king and rook first. The king moves out the way. Each other's knights attack each other's rooks. Rook d3 first, and knight back to e4. Then castle first with check, and then white takes the rook in the corner. Rook a7, let's say, castle check, take, and now something sensible. Maybe just b6 actually. b5. b5, b6. Looks like white. I mean, these pawns not going anywhere at the moment. Black is still behind in development. Maybe this was a way out with rook a7. Rook d3. Knight e4 played. Castle check, and then he takes in the corner. Is this so bad for black? Maybe not. Knight c6. Let's just consider all the highlighted colors. All the greens match up. So white has a rook, but black has knight for 2 pawns. So that's 5 each. Minor pieces, you got knight and bishop each, and then on the right hand side, the king side, the red ones, rook and 2 pawns each. From this, material is level. Knight back to b6, attacking bishop. Rook d8, grab the bishop, take, take, bishop back to a3. Lots of possibilities for white. When you drop the bishop back, maybe it can come back to b2 to attack the pawn. Rooks love open files, and white's rooks are working in his favor. Maybe the rook can go here to attack b7, f7 as well. So bishop back to a3, rook c7. So black stops white's rook entering. Rook f4, you attack the knight, knight back to f6, defending, stopping rook g4. Bishop b2 though, you attack the knight. And maybe white is not going to take this knight because his bishop is so much more powerful. But there's a key difference here. Knight e7, if it is black's move now, he's going to play knight d5. So then the knights defend each other. So white now takes his chance to get rid of this knight with bishop takes f6. The reason is, after this pawn could be a future target. It's all by itself now. It is isolated. The rooks might be able to get in at that pawn. h4 first. h5. Rook g3 check. King f7 and rook g5. Going after this pawn now. Rook d1 check. King out the way. Knight g6. You attack the rook and the pawn. Rook has to go back, so then you maintain the pin on the file. Knight takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. Knight back to g6. Rook h7 check. Skewer. King moves out the way, and then that pawn drops. Knight e5. Rook b6 check. Picking up this pawn? Not at the moment. Rook c6 played. Take, take. How to evaluate this? Well, it might be a draw, but who knows. Let's continue. King g3. King out the way. Rook c2, you attack the knight. Knight b4. Rook d2, get the file. king in, rook d6. You attack knight and pawn. Knight out the way, rook takes pawn. How do we win this position? If white can trade rook for knight and pawn, then white will be the one with a pawn. A winning pawn endgame. So that is the plan if it is possible. Knight f7, king e4. A lot of maneuvering, and we're going to get to the key point. Check and then come back. So king e4, I've just highlighted this because maybe there are 2 entry squares for white. Maybe the white king can get in on e6, or it can get on h5 and then g6, just trying to find a way in for the white king. Knight back to g8, king in, check. So forcing the king out, check. So in this position, if it's white's move now, he has found a way in. So king g6 stops that. So they're just shouldering each other, really. The kings cannot pass. King back, check. Forward, attack the knight, check. King up, again in this position, check, forcing the king back, knight back to g8. Rook there, king there. Swing, king f7. This might be the blunder of the game because this move allowed white's king to come in. With the king coming into f5, maybe there is now a route for the king in. King f4, rook there, king g4, and now king h5. He's finally found a way in. That's the next move, but maybe you can stop it with king g6. No, you get out of the way with check. Rook attacks knight, so black has to defend it with king here, king f7 or king h7, and then the king can come in. So white has found a way in. This happens in the game anyway. Knight e7, king h5, knight d5, rook f3, king e6, g4, get that pawn moving, and after king e5, king g6 in this position, black resigned. Why is this lost? Well, let's play on a few more moves. If you play knight f4 check, blocking this rook, king f7, making sure the king continues to attack that pawn. If you play f5, you just go g5, you just march it. Next case, if king here and then king e4, just move the rook back. There's pressure here. The important thing is, there's no good way to defend that. If you go king e5, now you just go check. Just check the guy. And with this move, there is no good way for black to defend the pawn. King moves, and then take, and then you run it. King g6, what if black put up more resistance? King g7. Just keep finding a way for white to attack this pawn, and black is going to run out of moves. Let's say king e7, rook f1, king e6, check. Just force the king away. The king goes here and then king f7. You're still attacking this, you've cut it off, and if black moves the knight, you win the pawn. So if he moves the king, you go here. That is going to drop, and this is what I mentioned at the start of this endgame. If white can find a way to get rid of the knight and pawn for the rook, then he's winning. After rook d5, that's it. King moves, take, and then a 1-pawn endgame. Here we have the table so far after round 8. We have Jan Nepomniachtchi at the top with 5 out of 8. Then we have Caruana, Vachier, Lagrave, Anish Giri, Wang Hao, Alexenko, Grishuk, and Ding Liren. Time for a puzzle. This game is between Caruana and MVL back in 2015 in Tartar Steel. The white king can only go e4 or to e5. Black now plays bishop d3 check. White blocks with the rook. Here it is checkmate in 2 moves, no matter what. Can you find it? Let me know in the comments below. Here is YouTube's suggestion for what to watch next. But if you don't like their suggestion, here's mine. Carlsen beats Penguin in 22 seconds. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a like and subscribe to the channel at the same time. If you press the bell, that means YouTube will let you know when I release a new video.